now we have seen the political causes that caused the uprising of 1857, which is also known as the First War of Independence. So you have learned the political causes of aggressive expansionist policies, the doctrine of lapse, subsidiary alliance, as well as the annexation of Awadh. Now all these factors were, the primary factors that angered the people, and as well as the aristocrats, the rulers, the talukdars, everybody. Now the point is, was it only the political factors that triggered the revolt of 1857? It cannot be so, because any event in history has to be triggered in a way where it pushes for the change. Now, we also did look into the fact that we have divided the causes of the revolt of 1857. So, we have already learned the political causes. The second set of causes that were very important was the economic causes that, provided the area for this particular change or event to take place.
कि बिना कंपनी सरकार की इजाजत के अफीम की खेती करना, खरीदना या बेचना कानूनन जुर्म है। तुम लोगों ने एक कानून तोड़ा है, इसलिए कलेक्टर साहब के हुक्म से तुम सबकी जमीन और जायदाद जब्त की जाती है।
लेकिन इसमें हमारा क्या कसूर है? साहब ने बोला उगाओ, हमने उगाया। साहब ने बोला बेचो, बेचा।
हमारी जमीन तो मत छीनो साहब, हम कहाँ जाएंगे?
रहम करो साहब, भगवान के लिए दया करके नहीं, गलती माफ करो। Keep your hands up!
Necessary, I'll deal with it! I said fire!
In the video, the British colonizers were exploiting the people to the fullest. These peasants, the common people, the masses, they were being exploited in the sense where, heavy taxations were being done, or primarily they were being exploited and tortured upon. Now, the video that we looked into was the video about the trade of afim, which is opium. Now, in this trade, people were exploited to the fullest. But it was not just the trade of opium. It was also any policy regarding the land and the peasants that was brought out by the Britisher was primarily to exploit the Indian masses, to exploit the Indian peasants. So, let's look into the factors where the British capitalist is trying to exploit the Indian masses to the fullest. Now here we have to realize the idea that the concept that the Britishers had was maximum revenue generation. This was a colony to them. This was not their homeland. This was not their motherland. This was a colony that was supposed to serve the purpose of revenue generation, and secondly, the production of raw materials and the, to provide the raw materials that they would need in their homeland, because at that point of time, we already know that there was industrialization happening in Britain. So this entire policy that was driven by profit-making ideology or the capitalist ideology of the British was driven by the factors of exploitation, was driven by the factors of torture. So we see that India was turned into a colonial economy to serve the British capitalist interests. So India was only to serve the capitalist British interest. It was not to prosper. It was, not to build an economy of itself. So when the Britishers came along, they also changed several political stances. Along with it, they changed several economic policies as well. That not only brought them most amount of revenue, but also created a peasant structure in India that was dilapidating, and that created a lot of, we could say, an amount of poverty, which resulted in the condition that the peasantry was in during the natural disasters like that of the famines in India. So the first is heavy taxation. We see that the peasants had to pay huge amount of taxes to British under their new revenue policies. So the British, when they came up with these new economic policies like that of the permanent settlement, the Royotwari settlement, it was driven to generate maximum revenue, maximum taxes from the peasant. So the peasant had a land holding, and on that land holding, it was burdened with an amount of tax that the peasant was not able to pay. Now imagine what would happen if the taxes weren't paid and if the peasant failed to pay the taxes. The peasant's land holding would be taken away. Not only would the land holdings be taken away, the peasant often would be tortured, would be killed, cattle taken away, houses burnt, and an amount of exploitation and torture that maybe we can't even imagine about. So this, chain of pressure that the British created through its new economic policies was to provide the peasants with heavy taxation and to generate a revenue for themselves. Now we see that the factor of evictions, where peasants are evicted from their own land if they fail to pay the taxes. As we were discussing, that what happens if these taxes are not paid, or what happens if there is a drought or a famine where there is not enough produce to pay the taxes, right? So in that case, the peasant was driven away from the land was taken away, modes of production was taken away, cattle was taken away. So primarily the peasant was, taken away from their own land holding. Now evictions not only happened in the land holdings or in peasantry, but also happened when Indians at high administrative posts were dismissed and English officers were appointed to replace them. So you can understand the kind of partiality that was taking place under the British government. The British wanted all of the higher official positions to be held by Englishmen and not Indians. So Indians were ideally not, they weren't allowed to prosper, in the sense that India was only to generate the revenue that was required by British, but it was not to prosper. Now what will create this maximum amount of revenue generation? Only taxes were not able to give Britishers the exact desired outcome. So what they ideally did was they changed the tariff policies as well. Now what were the tariff policies? The tariff policies were, the taxations that were to be put on the products that would be imported, the products that would be exported as well. Now we have to realize the fact that Britain at this point of time is generating mass products. Now it has the product and it has to create a demand for it. Where could the demand be created rather than the colonies that it had under? So India, with its vast population and vast market, became the place where Britishers started to send and sell their goods. Now in order to sell these goods, in order for these goods to gain primary importance, what was necessary? The Indian goods were to be given up. The Indian goods were to not be allowed to come in the forefront in these markets. So we see discriminatory tariff policies against Indian products. First, tax tax-free export of raw materials from India to Britain. Not only tax-free export of the raw materials, but also, no amount was to be paid for the raw materials. So most of the times the raw materials were carried, without an amount, free of cost to Britain, and then used for their production. Next, we see tax-free import of finished goods from Britain to India. So if you look at the 2 points very closely, first, the export is being done without a cost, so the British is not procuring any cost. Second, the import of finished goods from Britain to India is done without any cost. Again, the British colonizer is not procuring any cost. So neither are they paying for the resources that they are taking, nor are they paying a duty for the products that they are bringing in. So zero expenditure on the part of the British. But heavy taxes were being taken from the Indian export. So export of Indian handicrafts would have heavy taxes that were imposed upon them. We need to realize that India produced certain products that was very important for the aristocrats, for the upper classes. And that demand never really ceased. So what did the British colonizer do with this situation? They exacted the most amount of taxes, most amount of duty from the export of Indian handicrafts. Thus we see that in order for these British goods to become the star of the Indian markets, the Indian goods, Indian industries are being almost destroyed. So Indian handicrafts were being destroyed, Indian industries were not being able to prosper, they were not being allowed to function. So this entire process is often termed by the historians as a process of deindustrialization. For Britain to prosper industrially, a colony like India had to go through the process of the destruction of its own homegrown industries. So we see the destruction of traditional handicrafts and the deindustrialization of the Indian colony. So the demand for indigenous handicrafts declined rapidly. So because Indian markets did not have Indian homegrown products, so people of course moved to the alternative, which was British products, British goods, American goods that were available in the market. And these products were very cheap, so they were made cheap in a way that people could avail it easily. So people would choose those products instead of the little handicrafts or little textile products that still were coming from the Indian industries. But primarily these industries, these Indian industries were destroyed, they were diminishing, and they were on the verge of extinction. So we see that heavy unemployment is taking place. So not only due to the political structure or the policies that the Britishers were bringing, the talukdars, the feudal lords, the people who had little power in their hands, not only is their power displaced, but we see due to deindustrialization, a lot of people are thrown out of their jobs. The craftsmen, the people who were lending money, the people who were working in these homegrown industries, everybody was out of work because there was no market to sell the goods, even if the goods would be made. So ultimately, the policies, the economic policies that British colonizers were bringing up, that led to heavy amount of unemployment in the part of the Indian masses. So we see extinction, almost extinction of handicraft industries left artisans jobless. Shutdown of native courts deprived various aristocrats. The talukdars lost half of their estates. Now, when alliances and policies like that of subsidiary alliance were being signed, not only was the native ruler being deported, but the entirety of the court was being displaced. So we see that people who had jobs in these courts, who were being paid by these courts, were now jobless. Now the people, the talukdars, the feudal lords who had estates under them, those estates were directly going to the governance of the British, and they did not have any revenue from there, and they were out of work. The most important, change that was brought at this point of time was derived by the IIM Commission. So the IIM Commission forced the aristocrats without material evidence of their ownership of their estates to surrender their lands to the British. Nearly 20,000 estates were confiscated by the British. So what the Britishers were asking were for papers. What the Britishers were asking was for the proof that these lands were theirs. Now you can imagine at that point of time when, we are talking about a time when Mughal Empire was declining and the Britishers were coming in. It was not like the small talukdars, the feudal lords. They would keep heavy amount of documentation of ownership, or documentation as to when the land was procured, how the land was procured, let alone the peasants. The peasants did not even have any kind of proof, so they were the most vulnerable class. Now, the talukdars or the middle classes who were, semi-wealthy as well as the aristocrats, they did not have the proof to be produced in front of the British. So, what did the British do? The British stated that if you do not have a proof to show, the lands are going to be confiscated, estates were to be confiscated, and 20,000 estates were confiscated, were taken by the British. So not only was, the structure of economy being changed when Britishers were driving this factor of exploitation, torture, and heavy amount of, draining economy, sucking out economy out of the Indian homegrown industries, we see the factor of inflation as well. Inflation, why? Because at this point of time, because of the land policies, because of the economic policies, the Britishers were coming up with the idea that food grains were to be produced less. Why? Because the lands were to only produce crops that would ultimately be fruitful for revenue generation, that could be exported, that could be sold, and ultimately the British would be gaining a revenue out of it. So we see that the British are encouraging the people to cultivate commercial crops, which led to the shortage of food grain production. Now, when food grains won't be produced, what will the people eat? What will the peasants eat? What will the peasants sell? So, none of these things were taken into consideration. Crops like that of tobacco, indigo, cotton were being produced. Why? So that they could be sold in market. In fact, we know of instances where it was only indigo that was to be produced in the land, and if found contrary to that, then not only would the land be taken away, but the peasant would be tortured, would be exploited, all his means would be taken away by the British colonizers. So we see that increase in prices of the food grains. That is why ideally inflation is happening. Lesser the food grains, more the price of the food grains, because the available food grains was very less. So people who could buy it with a lot more money were buying it. So ideally what happened is the prices of the product of the food grain was of course increased in the market. Now, what would happen when the prices increase? We see that landlords and money lenders hoarded grains, causing severe famine. Now, famine had already occurred in India when the condition was that food grains are being produced less. There are no food grains that common people can take. But what increased the severity of the famine was the fact that the moneyed class, the landlords, the money lenders, these people, because they had the money, they hoarded food grains. They were keeping food grains, stacked in their storage for their usage, where people were not even getting, one day's meal during the famine. The famine that struck India at that point of time was so severe that it is often said that villages after villages were emptied due to famine, were deserted due to famine. Now, in this picture itself, you can see it's very visible what exactly was the state during famine in India, because these people, they don't look like human beings anymore. They were being reduced to living skeletons. Now, the contrary picture that can be seen at this point of time of famine was how less the relief that could be provided by the British was coming from them. So not only were they providing less relief, but they were not providing any amount of relief to the people. In this particular poster picture, you can see that the depiction of a little pouch being given. So you can imagine the amount that was being given. So it was not only nominal, it was not useful for these many people who were dying due to a famine, who were dying due to the unavailability of food. So we see how a cartoon sketch that was published in the Punch magazine is depicting the British ignorance about the Indian famine. You can see here that people are dying, people look like skeletons, but here the Britishers are handing over the nominal amount of relief, which did not make sense at that point of time. So, after the famine, due to the British economic policies, due to deindustrialization, we see that peasants, artisans, and small zamindar groups are grappling with poverty. So they were, the common mass, the common man was in the clutches of poverty, and they were dealing in poverty, where these groups, the peasants, artisans, small zamindars, were all out of work, were all out of revenue. Let alone revenue, they were out of the basic sort of the money that they would require to pass their days. So to recapitulate quickly, these were the economic causes that primarily prepared the base for the people, and how they were angered by these economic causes, by these economic policies, because these policies did not only affect the aristocrats, did not only strike a blow to the aristocrats, the money lending class, but the common man. So the common man, the common people, the masses were now so angered, in the sense because the British colonizers were literally taking away every revenue, and they were not working towards any homegrown generation for India as a colony to grow. So India, as we saw, was reduced to a colony only to support whatever the British sort of visualized in terms of economic returns. So we see first heavy taxation, the the methodologies, the policies that British colonizers brought out, evictions where lands, posts are being taken away. Indians are not primary in the picture anymore. Destruction of traditional handicrafts where deindustrialization is happening. Unemployment due to deindustrialization, due to heavy taxation, eviction, and destruction of industries. And inflation, where limitation of the growth of food grains is creating the food grains to become higher in price, ultimately leading to a severe famine. Thus, we can understand the fact that it was not just a political situation that had turned out to anger the masses, the people, but also several economic causes that were failing them. Now, these economic causes ultimately became the factors due to which we see the uprising of 1857. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at deltastep.com or download the DeltaStep app to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology, get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly, learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it is rewarding too. So register for free now.